Hey guys, tonight we're stepping gently into the flickering glow of gas lamps, the creak of ancient bed frames, and the strange leafy world of Victorian sleep remedies. You've had long days before, but imagine living in a time when getting a full night's rest required a complicated ballet of boiled vegetables, stiff corsets, and the overwhelming fear of being impolite in your dreams. You find yourself in a narrow bedroom, high above a foggy cobblestone street. The wallpaper is floral and slightly peeling, the ceiling cracked just enough to keep you wondering. In the corner, a faintly steaming cup of lettuce tea waits for you. Yes, lettuce. You didn't miss here, we'll get to that in a bit. First, you have to wrestle into a bed with more lace than structural support, under a mountain of itchy wool blankets. Good luck turning over. You probably won't survive this night without developing a permanent crick in your neck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly across the wooden floorboards, each step echoing through the bones of the house. Outside the window, a street lamp casts trembling shadows, and the smell of coal smoke weaves through the air. You glance at the nightstand. A brass candlestick, a porcelain dish with sugared lavender, and a curious folded note with a neat label. Lactuca sativa, steep before bed. Lettuce, again with the lettuce. But before we dive headlong into leafy sedatives, you should know this. Victorian sleep hygiene wasn't quite what you'd expect. For one, it often involved more ritual, not less. While modern wellness influencers tout minimalist sleep routines, Victorians practically built a ceremony around falling asleep. And while some of their ideas now seem quaint, drinking hot milk, arranging pillows just so, others were outright bizarre, or deeply problematic, or both. Imagine having your bedroom inspected by a doctor who insists that your insomnia is a symptom of spiritual laziness, or being told that novels, especially the exciting kind, might corrupt your sleep. Not your soul, your sleep. Even Dickens wasn't safe. But the obsession with sleep wasn't random. It was born from real frustration. You see, by the mid-1800s, people in Britain were quite frankly exhausted. Urban noise, industrial shifts, rising anxiety about status and morality. None of these lent themselves to peaceful rest. The growing cities were like thunderous machines that never truly stopped. And while rich families could afford countryside retreats and feather-stuffed mattresses, most people coped with noisy tenements, stiff beds, and windows that barely opened. So here you are, gently perched on the edge of a sagging bed that's seen at least 3 generations of questionable sleep posture. You light your candle, because electricity isn't a thing yet, and exhale into the silence. The kind of silence that isn't really silent. It's filled with the far-off clatter of hooves, the echo of your landlady's cough, and the faint creaking of something in the walls. You shake it off. It's probably just the plumbing ghost again. Now, back to that lettuce tea. You sip it tentatively. It tastes damp, slightly earthy, like someone steeped a salad, which they did. But to your surprise, it's oddly comforting. Warm, bitter, a little nutty. Victorian herbalists believed that lettuce had nervine properties, meaning it soothed frayed nerves. Lettuce seed oil was even used medicinally as a mild sedative, and recipes for lettuce opiates appear in Old English pharmacopoeias. While modern science shrugs at these claims, saying there's some evidence but nothing definitive, the Victorians swore by it, especially those who didn't trust more aggressive sleep aids like laudanum or bromide. And speaking of bromide, yes, that's the stuff that made you forget who you were for a few hours. Victorians had a wide array of chemical options if lettuce didn't cut it. But many preferred the natural route, especially among the middle class who saw virtue in discomfort, as long as it was the right kind of discomfort. Pain from a hard mattress, character building, trouble sleeping because you're racked, with guilt for not writing enough thank you notes. Perfectly normal. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on moral purity and sleep was a top-down invention, something pushed by etiquette manuals and church sermons, or a genuine grassroots cultural shift. Either way, by the 1850s, sleep had become more than rest. It was a performance, a demonstration of self-control, refinement, and proper domestic behavior. And so, you finish your tea, you fluff the pillow, you arrange yourself like a character, in a pre-Raphaelite painting. You don't just sleep, you enter repose, Victorian style. The candle sputters, the air stills. Somewhere downstairs a clock begins to chime. 1, 2, 3. Time blurs. Your eyes grow heavy, and you begin to wonder. What other strange little tricks did people use back then to tame the beast of sleeplessness? You shift under the weight of at least 3 woolen blankets and a stiff upper lip, listening as London hums through the cracks in the window pane. It's not the kind of hum that helps you sleep. It's a low, metallic murmur, punctuated by the occasional cartwheel screeching on cobblestones, a distant dog barking as though arguing with a ghost, and somewhere, unmistakably, the shout of someone selling eels. At 2 in the morning. This is what it means to be sleepless in Victorian London. And trust me, everyone is. You take a deep breath. It smells like damp stone, boiled cabbage, and faintly horse, even indoors, even on the 3rd floor. The Victorian era, you soon realize, was not built for restful nights. Between the industrial clamor and unpredictable lighting, many people never quite knew when to sleep. Gas lamps glowed long into the evening, shopkeepers kept inconsistent hours, and factories, well, factories ran when factories wanted to, which usually meant always. For those living in the heart of London, or even its smoky outer neighborhoods, peace and quiet were rare commodities. Homes had thin walls and thinner insulation. A crying baby next door? You heard every wail. Someone cooking onions 2 floors down. It might as well be in your own kitchen. And then there were the horse-drawn omnibuses. These charming little public transport nightmares rumbled through the city at all hours, their wheels metal-clad and perfectly engineered to echo dramatically over stone streets. It's said that the clatter of hooves and wheels formed the lullaby of the city. Not soothing lullaby, but more of a clanging overture that never seemed to end. For wealthier residents, the solution was to flee. Country estates, holiday homes, or even the rare soundproof townhouse offered relief. But for the average city dweller, insomnia wasn't a disorder. It was just Tuesday. One fringe solution emerged in the form of sound discipline, a real term. Doctors and social critics advised that people could train themselves to ignore noise, the method, exposure, lots and lots of it, fall asleep to bells, cries and arguments. Eventually your brain would simply give up. Like a toddler with a tambourine, if you ignore it long enough, it might stop. Or not. Meanwhile, in the coal-streaked shadows of East London, the working class developed their own nighttime rituals. A hot brick at the foot of the bed, a scrap of newspaper to line the pillow, a mug of weak beer or milk mixed with molasses. Sleep was both a luxury and a survival tactic. Historians still argue whether Victorian insomnia was more environmental or psychological. Sure, the noise didn't help, but many believe it was a deeper cultural shift, a collision between the old agrarian rhythms of sunrise to sunset living and the new urban mechanized world. Factory whistles replaced roosters, office deadlines replaced seasons. It was like your entire body still belonged to the countryside, but your brain had moved into a soot-covered city. And speaking of brains, Victorians loved to blame them, specifically overactive ones. Medical journals of the time described the brain fever of the sleepless, the idea that thinking too much could literally overheat your mind and cause night terrors, melancholy, or worse, writing poetry. The cure: less reading, fewer deep thoughts, more boiled vegetables, particularly, yes, lettuce again. Lettuce was everywhere. You shift your weight again, pressing your cheek against the cool linen pillow. Your ears catch the faintest sound. A street singer maybe, or just a wind-blown scrap of melody. There were often musicians in the city at night. Not professional ones, but wandering minstrels, barrel organ players, or children with makeshift flutes carved from reeds. If you're lucky, the tune is slow, meandering, almost hypnotic. If you're not, it's off-key and repetitive. Tonight it seems to be both. And still, you lie awake. Victorian homes rarely had consistent heating, and windows weren't much use at keeping the cold out. So people bundled up. Entire families slept in the same room. not always for affection but for warmth and economy. Privacy was a modern concept. You might sleep with your sister, cousin and aunt all packed into a single bed, like floral-scented sardines. No wonder people woke up cranky. You let your mind drift for a moment to the idea of night air. At the time, many believed that cool night breezes could spread disease, particularly miasmas, noxious vapors blamed for everything from cholera to heartbreak. To protect yourself, windows were often kept shut tight, creating bedrooms that were warm, stuffy and full of snoring. The sleep trifecta. Doctors and quacks alike offered remedies. Some sold patent elixirs with names like Dr. Crumpleton's, gentle restorative. Others suggested electric collars, worn around the neck and believed to realign your inner frequencies. You may not be able to breathe well, but at least your aura's balanced. And if all else failed, you could just walk it off, literally. The midnight constitutional was a respected, if slightly suspicious, activity. Picture yourself bundled in a greatcoat, walking the perimeter of your block by gaslight, dodging suspicious puddles and the occasional drunkard. And no, there were no podcasts to keep you company. Just your thoughts, the fog, and perhaps the soft shuffle of someone else doing the same. You glance again at the candle. It's burning lower now. The flame flickers, bending in some unseen draft. Your body is tired, but your mind continues its gentle buzzing. Outside, the noise hasn't stopped. But maybe, just maybe, it's fading. Maybe you've adjusted. Maybe the city has finally started to sleep. Now that you've accepted that the night noises aren't going anywhere, your thoughts start drifting toward the people who made a profession out of this restlessness. Enter the Nightmen. These weren't mysterious vigilantes or clandestine philosophers, though that would have been far more glamorous. No, Nightmen had one job: to collect and cart away human waste from chamber pots and privies while the rest of the city tried and often failed to sleep. And their timing, impeccably disruptive. Around 2 or 3 a.m., just when the city was at its most begrudgingly peaceful, you'd hear the creak of wooden wheels, the squelch of thick boots in the sludge, and maybe the slosh of a pail being emptied into a barrel. It's a smell you don't soon forget, wafting up from below like a pungent lullaby. You turn on your side and grimace. Sleep is a fantasy. Still, Victorian London needed these men. Before sewers were standardized, most human waste was manually removed. Privies emptied into cesspools which, once full, had to be cleaned out by someone. That someone was the Nightman. The idea was that doing this job in darkness would spare society's delicate sensibilities. In reality, it spared no noses, and certainly no sleepers. Your upstairs neighbor, bless him, has a collection of chamber pots that seem to get more vocal by the day. Every now and then he drops the lid. Clang, like clockwork. You wonder briefly if he's doing it on purpose. Maybe it's his own small rebellion against the tyranny of early bedtimes. Now, lest you think this was all urban madness, we should peek into the countryside for a moment. Rural areas, while quieter, had their own nocturnal interruptions. Animals mostly. A cow lowing into the night. A goose with dreams of flight. A rooster confused by gaslight drifting from a distant manor. It was nature's version of insomnia, and you, tucked into a straw-stuffed mattress, had little choice but to embrace it. Sleep even in silence wasn't guaranteed, especially if your mattress had bedbugs, which, spoiler alert, most did. Let's linger for a moment on those so-called beds. The average Victorian bed, for a middle or working-class person, was a wooden frame with ropes strung across like a crude trampoline. On top of this sat a tick, a cloth sack stuffed with straw, horsehair or feathers, depending on how fancy you were feeling. These sacks weren't always replaced regularly, meaning by year 2 you might be cuddling a mouse nest. The expression "sleep tight," that comes from tightening the ropes of your bed frame so your mattress wouldn't sag into a hammock of despair. You'd use a metal key to crank the ropes taut. If you forgot, you'd roll toward the center like a human burrito. Comfortable? Not exactly. But it builds character. Historians still debate whether these beds helped sleep through sheer exhaustion or contributed to insomnia through sheer discomfort. One camp insists that working-class Victorians were too tired to care. Another suggests that poor bedding and poor air quality made deep rest impossible. As with most things Victorian, the answer is probably both but worse. But don't worry, there were solutions. One popular approach was to air out the bedding weekly. This involved hanging your mattress out the window and hoping it didn't rain or get stolen. Another solution? Herbs. Lavender sachets, hops pillows, and even dried mint were sewn into little muslin bags and tucked beneath pillows to promote slumber. That's if you had time to prepare. For many, sleep was stolen in snatches, a nap by the fireplace, a doze in the workshop corner. The concept of a solid 8-hour sleep cycle hadn't quite landed yet. People often went to bed after sundown, woke in the night, prayed or read or gossiped a little, then slept again until morning. This two-sleep pattern, known as segmented sleep, was considered totally normal. You'd wake up around midnight, stretch your legs, eat a biscuit, then crawl back in and hope your partner hadn't stolen all the blankets. You adjust your own blanket now, thankfully not horsehair filled, and wonder what kind of biscuit they ate at midnight. Something dull, probably, oat-based, with a whiff of melancholy. The upper classes, meanwhile, had more luxurious sleep rituals. They favoured feather beds, heavy velvet drapes to block out moonlight, and sometimes servants who warmed the sheets with pans of coals. Which sounds romantic until you consider how often those pans caused fires. Fire safety was mostly wishful thinking. One documented aristocrat refused to sleep unless her room had been doused in rosewater and the pillows fluffed hourly. Another swore by the calming powers of French novels, though only the boring ones. Passion was considered stimulating. Sleepy literature had to feature a lot of estate taxes and dialogue about weather. Still awake? You're not alone. Because even with all this chaos, even with the horse carts, musical cabbage sellers and chamber pot clatter, the Victorians longed for peace. They searched for silence, craved it in fact, like modern people crave Wi-Fi. One poet wrote, "Give me stillness or give me death," which sounds dramatic until you've tried to sleep through a neighbour's tuba lesson. Which brings us back to silence, a commodity more rare than diamonds in London. Silence was considered restorative, almost medicinal. The noiseless hours are those that calm the mind, claimed one doctor, who likely owned a townhouse, far from the Eel district. For most people, silence was theoretical. It lived in pamphlets and the letters of wistful insomniacs. Still, they tried. Padded furniture, thick rugs, and sometimes, most quaintly, silent circles, groups of people who sat together in complete quiet for an hour, believing shared silence had healing powers. You let that thought settle in your chest like a warm cup of tea. A room full of strangers, all agreeing not to speak, just to remember what peace feels like. There's something sweet in that, something that floats above the coal dust and the coughing and the clang of boots on stone. For now you imagine that silence. Let it surround you, let it muffle the sound of horses, let it hush the ghost of the nightman, let it wrap around you like linen, soft and cool. Just as you begin to drift towards something resembling slumber, the stillness is pierced, not by footsteps or shouting or nightmen, but by something stranger. A cart rolls by, but this one isn't sloshing with waste or creaking with coal. No, this cart is much quieter, too quiet really. It jingles faintly, and behind it there walks a man holding what looks suspiciously like a giant lettuce. This, dear listener, is your introduction to one of Victorian Britain's more endearing sleep obsessions, lettuce-based remedies. Not just eating it, mind you, though that was part of it, but boiling it, sniffing it, and occasionally rubbing it on your face. Because apparently, the key to sleep was not chamomile or meditation or a dark room. It was a wilting salad. The idea wasn't entirely unscientific, for the time anyway. Lettuce contains a mild sedative compound called lactucarium, sometimes referred to by herbalists as lettuce opium. It's far too weak to make anyone truly drowsy in practical doses, but try telling that to the Victorians. They believed wholeheartedly that a warm cup of lettuce broth, yes, that's boiled lettuce water, would lull even the most restless soul into a dreamless sleep. And so, kitchens late at night often reeked not of cocoa or tea, but of simmered greens. You imagine yourself standing in your own kitchen in 1854, hunched over a small pot, stirring chopped romaine like it's the elixir of life. The recipe is simple. 1 whole head of lettuce, a pint of water, a pinch of nutmeg for flavor, and perhaps placebo. Then simmer gently for 10 minutes. Strain, sip, sigh. Regret your choices. Try to sleep anyway, it wasn't just lettuce either. Victorian herbalists were equal parts doctors, mystics, and enthusiastic gardeners. Poppy syrup was popular, though frowned upon for children, though that didn't always stop anyone. Then there was hops tea, passion flower extract, and the truly bitter valerian root. Most tasted like damp lawn clippings, but the worse it tasted, the more they trusted it worked. Historians still argue whether these treatments were truly sedative or merely a comfort ritual. It may be that the act of preparing the sleep remedy was half the medicine. After all, it gave insomniacs something to do at 2 a.m., besides lying awake counting the soot spots on the ceiling. And, as we know, boredom is nature's best sedative. But here's where things take a turn. Because once lettuce entered the world of sleep science, Victorian entrepreneurs did what they did best. They monetized it. Enter Dr. James Thornton's Lactuca sleep syrup. Promising restful slumber without consequence, it was sold in apothecaries from Manchester to Devon. The label featured a drawing of a yawning moon and a field of lettuce that looked suspiciously like broccoli. Ingredients were vague but boasted concentrated sap of the lettuce flower. There's no such thing, of course, but it sounded reassuring. Another inventor sold sleep pillows infused with dried lettuce leaves and a mystery powder derived from alpine air. This powder turned out to be powdered chalk. But hey, marketing is everything. You imagine walking into an apothecary after a week of sleeplessness, clutching your coin purse like a lifeline. The shelves gleam with bottles, glass-stoppered, labeled in looping script. A clerk with an improbably tall collar recommends Thornton's lettuce elixir, and you nod like your life depends on it. Because tonight you will sleep, even if it takes drinking vegetable water laced with sugar and false hope. Of course, not everyone was convinced. A small but vocal group of medical professionals, the ones not peddling lettuce syrup, warned that insomnia had more to do with overheated brains and excessive mental stimulation. Their solution? Silence. Deep, uninterrupted silence. Not a bad theory, really, but hard to come by in an age when trains rattled through towns at midnight and neighbors practiced the violin without a conscience. Still, silence was pursued, desperately, even. Wealthier families built what they called sleeping cabins at the back of their gardens, tiny one-room huts where a family member could escape the cacophony of shared quarters. These cabins were marketed as spiritual retreats and often furnished with just a bed, a candle, and a Bible. But make no mistake, they were designed for peace, not prayer. You walk through a dewy garden now, your bare feet chilled by the grass. Ahead, a wooden door opens to reveal a tiny candlelit room. The mattress is firm, the air still. There is no child crying, no Coleman calling, no vegetable cart rattling past. Just silence, and the faint smell of lavender rubbed into the wood. You lie down. You imagine the stillness creeping in like fog, cool and deliberate. Then bang. The neighbor's cat has overturned something in the alley again. The pursuit of silence never really won. But it wasn't for lack of trying. Some went so far as to stuff rags into the window cracks, to hang carpets on walls to deaden sound, to build double doors and close them like vaults. One enterprising insomniac even created a soundproof sleeping helmet, a padded bonnet with ear flaps tied under the chin. It worked about as well as you'd expect, and looked even worse. Still, the sleep-starved were willing to try anything, including one very peculiar remedy from a pamphlet titled How to Court Slumber, a Guide for Restless Souls. The tip? Whisper. Lettuce allowed 3 times before bed, because apparently just saying the word had power. You try it now, softly. Let, tuss, let, tuss, let, tuss. Do you feel sleepier, or just a little bit ridiculous? Either way, it's working. It's past midnight now in Victorian London, and you find yourself wandering again, this time through a quieter part of town, where the gas lamps flicker like weary sentries and the streets are cobbled with echoes. The fog is heavier here, curling, between wrought iron fences and creeping up sandstone steps, like it's looking for a place to rest too. You pause in front of a modest brick house with curtains drawn tightly shut. On the stoop lies an empty bottle with a tattered label, Dr. Whitby's Night Drops. The words soporific tonic and for nervous agitation are barely visible through the grime. Someone inside clearly tried to chase down sleep tonight. You wouldn't be surprised if they'd also tried another widely touted solution, retiring to bed with a full stomach. Yes, unlike modern advice that warns against heavy late-night meals, the Victorians sometimes encouraged it, so long as the food was bland, comforting, and above all, British. The sleep menus of the restless elite featured stewed apples, barley, pudding, soft-boiled eggs, and the classic milky porridge. One 1872 housekeeping manual even recommended a lukewarm potato, eaten without salt, as an admirable sedative food. You picture yourself sadly forking a naked potato in candlelight while muttering, "Yes, this is definitely helping." The rationale? A full belly diverted the blood away from the brain, supposedly cooling it, calming thought, and ushering in sleep. Never mind that indigestion was a common side effect. One pamphlet delicately advised, "Should wind arise, try not to fret, for fretfulness is the foe of slumber." A poetic way to say, you brought this on yourself. Historians still debate whether this sleepy stomach approach ever truly worked, or if it merely gave the anxious something concrete to do. Eat, wait, lie down, hope, but not all Victorian. Sleep rituals were edible. Let's talk about posture, specifically restful positioning of the limbs, which sounds suspiciously like a phrase invented by someone who had absolutely run out of ideas. Medical manuals insisted on lying on your right side with your left leg bent no more than 30 degrees. Too much bending, they warned, would excite internal energies. Arms were to be placed below the chest but not crossed, lest the limbs form a barrier against lunar influence. That last part isn't a joke. Victorian sleep science had a surprising amount of lunar obsession baked into it. There was even a brief fad in upper-class circles for moon-facing beds. These were positioned to catch moonlight at a certain angle through the window, thought to promote deep rest and gentle temperaments. You imagine waking up cranky and your butler solemnly repositioning your bed frame. The moon was too shy last night, sir. In some circles, insomnia was treated more like a personality flaw than a medical issue. If you couldn't sleep, you were seen as undisciplined, perhaps even morally questionable. A well-rested man was a virtuous man. The sleep-deprived were urged to keep journals cataloguing their every waking minute, what they ate, what they read, when they sneezed. These wake logs became popular among middle-class women, many of whom blamed their sleeplessness on corsets, candlelight, and unresolved romantic tension. One particularly earnest woman from Bath wrote nightly in her log, "No sleep. Listened to neighbour's dog. Thought of George. Regretted toast at 9 joule." There's something soothing, though, about the slow ritual of it. You can picture her by her vanity, hair brushed back, pen scratching gently across the paper as the city winds down outside. It's worth noting that not every cure came with instructions. Some came with ambiance. Cue the emergence of sleep concerts. Yes, literal gatherings where musicians performed soft, repetitive melodies for audiences, who were encouraged to doze. These weren't public events so much as upper-class parlor entertainments. The favored instrument, the glass harmonica, invented by Benjamin Franklin but wildly popular in Victorian drawing rooms. It produced a ghostly, underwater kind of tone that was either mesmerizing or headache-inducing, depending on whom you asked. One reviewer called it the sound of a tea kettle having romantic thoughts. Still, it was used for sleep by the fashionable elite, often paired with a cup of warm milk and the strategic release of lavender oil into the air via tiny spirit lamps. Imagine sitting in such a drawing room now, reclining on a fainting couch, while some pale gentleman in ruffled sleeves gently spins his fingers along dampened glass bowls. Your eyes begin to close. You drift. Then someone coughs violently into a lace handkerchief and the spell is broken. Again. But these failed efforts all point to something deeply human, something you've probably felt yourself. that desperate, irrational optimism that this will finally be the night you sleep. You've boiled lettuce, you've eaten sad potatoes, you've aligned your limbs like a geometry diagram, and you've faced your bed toward the moon. Still, the clock ticks on. But there's one last remedy you haven't tried yet, a sleep hat, not to be confused with a nightcap, the soft, drapey kind worn by Dickensian characters. No, this was the Insomnia helmet, patented in 1873 by a Mr. Lionel Grimshaw. It was designed to gently press upon the temples and warm the occipital bone, which is a fancy way of saying it hugged your head like a sleepy vice. It looked, how shall we say, deeply unfortunate. Think padded bonnet meets fencing mask. Reviews were mixed. One user claimed it altered his dreams, making them more cooperative. Another said it gave him tinnitus. Still, desperate people wore it proudly, perhaps hoping that compressing the brain slightly might also compress their worries. As you imagine yourself trying on this absurd contraption, chin strap dangling, you can't help but laugh a little. And maybe that's part of the charm. How sincerely, how stubbornly the Victorians chased rest. And how in that fumbling, overly complicated way, they weren't all that different from you. You too have searched the internet for sleep tips. At 3 a.m. you've adjusted pillows, diffused lavender, and maybe even considered boiling lettuce once. The world changes. Sleeplessness, not so much. And so, you breathe out slowly. Let that lettuce-scented air leave your lungs. It's time to drift a little further, into deeper territory. The fog has thinned a bit, or maybe your mind has. It's hard to tell now as you drift further into the odd comforts of the Victorian sleep world. You find yourself padding softly through a different corridor of history, lined with lace curtains and soft ticking clocks. This is the bedroom of a more peculiar sort of insomniac, the one who believes silence is the root of all evil. Yes, while some Victorians craved complete stillness to fall asleep, others were terrified of it. Enter the era of nocturnal sound, machines, long before white noise apps and soothing YouTube loops. One gentleman in Surrey reportedly slept with a self-made tick box, a wooden cube containing a small metronome, a few pebbles, and a gear wheel that made a light clacking noise every 5 seconds. The effect? Something between a heartbeat and a persistent rodent. He swore it was the only thing that kept his mind from spinning about in maddening circles. Another, enterprising soul created a rain cabinet, a tin tray suspended above a brass bowl, slowly dripping water at irregular intervals throughout the night. His logic: nature's inconsistencies are more calming than a metronome's tyranny. Historians still argue whether these devices actually promoted better sleep or just gave the user something new to obsess over. But there's a wider truth tucked inside these curious gadgets. Victorians were becoming increasingly obsessed with the environment of sleep. The idea that your room could betray you, that lighting, air quality, and even wallpaper might conspire against rest, was gaining ground. Take, for example, the oxygen dilemma. Before anyone had heard of HEPA filters or humidifiers, Victorians were furiously debating whether a tightly closed window was a death trap or a sleep sanctuary. Newspapers ran editorials like, "On the rightness of fresh air in night hours." Letters poured in. Everyone had an opinion, but no one could agree. You might smile imagining couples fighting over window latches by candlelight. "Open it and I'll catch my death. Close it and I'll suffocate in my petticoat." Some medical professionals warned that night air was impure and bloated with city poisons, especially in industrial towns like Manchester or Liverpool. Others, more progressive, advocated deep ventilation, leaving the window ajar and sleeping with a damp cloth over the mouth to filter the soot. You picture this and wonder if anyone made it through the night without dreaming of drowning. Even the colors of one's bedroom came under scrutiny. A popular 1880 guidebook titled The Moral Palette suggested that hues like soft blue, lavender, or cream encouraged docility of the nerves, while reds and deep greens were considered far too stimulating for the fragile nocturne mind. Yes, your wallpaper could apparently ruin your REM cycle. This was also the age when bedrooms began to split along gendered lines, especially among the upper class. Men's sleep chambers were often darker, wood-paneled, with hunting prints and heavy drapes. Women's rooms leaned toward florals, pastels, and windowsills lined with chamomile. The thinking was simple. Men needed rest from the stress of doing, women from the stress of being. That distinction sounds dated, yes, but it helps explain why women's insomnia remedies veered heavily into the herbal, mystical, and overtly emotional. This brings us to one of the sleep era's more fragrant detours: dream pillows. These were small sachets of cloth stuffed with dried herbs like lavender, chamomile, hops, or, yes again, lettuce. Women would tuck them beneath the pillow or into the bedclothes, hoping the scent would lull them to sleep. Recipes varied, but many included something called sweet flag, a marsh plant with a lemony tang, and betony, which was supposed to ward off nightmares and marital dissatisfaction. You imagine lying in bed, head resting lightly on a bundle of dried flora that smells like your grandmother's pantry. It's soothing in theory, itchy in practice. And then there were the bedtime stories, not for children but for adults. Some of these were written especially for the sleepless and sold as part of somnolence kits, which included a pamphlet of dull reading, a small tin of peppermint lozenges, and sometimes a vial of sleeping ether to sniff, not drink. The stories were intentionally uneventful. One notable example, The Life of an Elderberry Tree, a 28-page novella in which absolutely nothing happens except a tree slowly growing, getting pruned, and eventually rotting at the base. It was praised as an admirable sedative of the intellect. You can almost hear the sighs of relief as page after page passed without a single plot twist. But for the truly desperate, sleep wasn't something to wait for. It was something to trigger. Cue the strange art of mental bathing, a practice rooted in both mesmerism and amateur psychology. It involved lying perfectly still while visualizing calming images, drifting clouds, flowing rivers, endless fields of barley. Nothing too exciting, nothing with ducks. Ducks, according to one doctor, were too animated for the anxious sleeper. You close your eyes now and try it. Drifting clouds, barley fields, no ducks. It works for a moment until your brain suggests, what if the barley field caught fire and the spell is broken again? Classic. Yet among all this, herbal pillows, musical bowls, and oxygen paranoia. Perhaps the most touching detail is how deeply people wanted to believe in something, anything. A gentle push from a kind universe, telling them it was okay to stop thinking. The Victorians weren't just inventing cures for insomnia, they were inventing reasons for it. Some spiritualists claimed sleeplessness was evidence of a sensitive soul, too attuned to worldly pain. Others believed it was punishment for reading immoral literature by candlelight. One minister famously warned his congregation, "Insomnia is the tax levied on idle minds by a just God." Tough crowd. So tonight, if you find yourself blinking at the ceiling, remember, at least you don't have to wear a lettuce poultice, wrap your head in a brass vice, or sniff ether while reading about the emotional life of a shrub. Instead, you can simply keep listening and drifting through the quiet fog of history. You're still here, tucked softly into this odd herbal-scented labyrinth of Victorian remedies, floating between barley fields and metronomes. And now we tiptoe into one of the sleep world's most experimental alleys, where science, superstition, and some serious stretching collided. Yes, welcome to the strange chapter of Victorian sleep postures and contraptions. Let's start with the bed itself. You might assume a mattress is just a mattress, but in the 19th century, it was a battleground of opinions. The working class often slept on stuffed straw mats or lumpy feather beds, while the wealthier classes were busy debating over horsehair mattresses, praised for their firmness, and spring mattresses, which were considered scandalously bouncy. One London physician even suggested that a mattress too soft would encourage immoral dreams, though he didn't specify whether they involved horses or springs. Then came the positioning. While you might flop into bed face first after a long day, Victorians had rules. Medical texts advised sleeping on your right side to ease the burden on the heart, while some religious leaders insisted the left side was more pleasing to angels. Historians still argue whether these views were grounded in medical theory, moral panic, or just whichever way someone's nightcap tilted. But wait, it gets better. One of the most peculiar inventions of the era was the anti-snoring posture frame, a wooden contraption resembling a small ladder that strapped across your back. Its goal, to prevent you from turning onto your back while you slept, because sleeping face up was believed to cause nightmares, paralysis, and of course, ungodly snoring. Imagine strapping yourself into a baby gate every night just to avoid becoming a human foghorn. There's something both comical and heartbreaking about it. The lengths people would go to avoid disturbing their spouse or their own dreams feel both antiquated and oddly familiar. And speaking of spouses, the Victorian double bed wasn't quite the co-sleeping paradise modern romantic comedies would have you believe. In fact, many upper-class couples slept apart, often in separate rooms entirely. Why? Because sharing a bed was believed to drain one's vital energy during sleep. One early health manual put it bluntly. To lie adjacent to another is to share fatigue as well as warmth. You imagine two exhausted people turning toward each other across a cold, polished hallway and deciding, actually, I'll just see you at breakfast. Even the humble pillow was not exempt from scrutiny. Some believed high pillows encouraged bad digestion, while others feared low pillows would allow pneumatic vapors to enter the head unchecked. The sweet spot? A pillow stuffed with spelt and barley husks adjusted nightly by candlelight. You reach for your memory foam now and thank the stars you don't have to wrestle a bag of grains into proper cervical alignment. Of course, some Victorians ignored the manuals and just got inventive. One woman in Bath reportedly built a sleep dome, a half-sphere frame draped with thick curtains designed to muffle outside noise and keep warmth in. It looked like a cross between a mosquito net and a Victorian diving bell. She claimed it helped her dream more vividly, though she often woke up with wild hair and confused cats. Meanwhile, over in Yorkshire, a group of amateur thinkers formed the Society for the Promotion of Somnolent Experimentation, which sounds like a very cozy secret society, but mostly involved people writing long letters about things like goose down slipper socks and pre-slumber flexion routines. Yes, stretching became a thing, and not just simple toe touches. Some doctors promoted a full series of calisthenics, gentle arm circles, backward shoulder rolls, neck tilts, all meant to realign the etheric body. Think of it as proto-yoga, minus the pants and incense. There's a lovely absurdity to it all. You can picture a stuffy gentleman in striped pajamas, balancing on one foot while his candle sputters beside him, muttering, "To bed, perchance to not collapse." And through it all, there's a creeping sense of both desperation and ingenuity. The Victorian world was waking up to the idea that sleep wasn't just a passive state. It was something to curate, to design, to optimize. They just didn't yet have the language for it, which is why we also begin to see early versions of the modern sleep diary. Some insomniacs, especially ladies of the leisure class, kept meticulous logs of their slumber. They'd record time of last meal and whether it included pickled eggs, number of sneezes before bed, number of thoughts about death before lights out, often a worrying amount, the sound of the street outside, noted as one late clopper, meaning a single horse-drawn cab. One such diary even includes a complaint about the ghost of Aunt Mildred, who apparently liked to hover near the wardrobe. It's unclear whether Aunt Mildred was real, spectral, or simply a figment of overcooked cabbage. The Victorians weren't just tracking data. They were trying to make sense of a world that refused to quiet down when they did. Nighttime was no longer just darkness and sleep. It was a battleground of the self. Thoughts, fears, habits, and stray breezes. In a way, you're doing the same thing right now. Tuning into this story, listening for patterns, trying to float down some imagined hallway, a corridor of muffled inventions and questionable science, all in search of the same thing Victorians wanted: peace. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to find it, tucked between the folds of a barley pillow and the gentle creak of a dream dome. You might even consider trying a light backward shoulder roll. Just don't fall out of bed. The journey continues softer now, like a memory you can't quite place. Let's keep drifting, ever so gently, to the next chapter. You've now glided through posture cages, barley-stuffed pillows and spectral Aunt Mildred, and as your mind eases further into this velvety Victorian haze, we enter perhaps the most serene, strange, and softly lit corner of the 19th century. Sleep world, the sleeping chamber itself, a symphony of scents, silence, moonlight, and the occasional inexplicable taxidermy owl. Let's begin with the air. In our age, we plug in diffusers and purifiers. But back then, sleep hygiene meant something quite literal. Bedrooms were meant to be aired out every day, even in winter. A housemaid would fling the sash windows open at dawn, letting in a blast of London fog thick enough to chew on, then shut them an hour later after the miasmas had been blown away. Victorians were obsessed with ventilation. Not just windows, but wall vents, ceiling grills, and even air tubes that funneled air from one part of the house to another. A well-breathed room was a moral room. Stale air was associated with sloth, sin, and, ironically, insomnia. Historians still argue whether this ventilation craze helped with sleep or just gave everyone chapped lips and mild frostbite. Then there was light, or rather, the lack of it. Unlike today's LED-lit chaos, the Victorian night was properly dark. Gas lamps were turned off or dimmed, candles were snuffed. Thick velvet curtains, often the weight of a wet elephant, blocked out moonlight and nosy neighbors. One household guide even suggested covering any reflective surface to prevent ghostly glimmers. You picture a lady wrapping a mirror in a doily, just in case it decided to catch a passing soul mid-yawn. But not everyone wanted complete darkness. Some aristocrats kept a night lamp, a shallow dish of whale oil or paraffin with a floating wick. It gave off the faintest orange glow, flickering like a whisper. There's something tender about that. A flame too small to see clearly by, but just enough to keep the shadows from growing teeth. Sound, too, was carefully managed. Urban homes, especially in London, faced the challenge of horse hooves, shouting, vendors and the occasional barrel organ playing Rule Britannia at 2 a.m. To counter this, people employed an array of DIY sound dampeners, wool-stuffed door gaps, heavy undercurtains to muffle street noise, even double-layered wallpapers, one layer of floral pattern, one of cotton batting, to absorb clattering vibrations of E. Of course, nothing beat the aristocratic solution, moving to the countryside entirely. When you couldn't sleep in London, you simply relocated. Sleep tourism, Victorian style. Let's not forget scent. Lavender, of course, reigned supreme. Sachets of it were placed under pillows, tucked into nightgowns, and dangled from bedposts. But other scents were popular too. Rose petals, chamomile, lemon balm, and even warm milk infused with lettuce essence, which sounds like a salad having a midlife crisis. Then there was vinegar. Yes, vinegar. Victorians believed vinegar not only disinfected the air, but had calming properties. Some would dab vinegar on their temples before bed, or place a saucer of it near their nightstand, claiming it warded off nightmares. You try to imagine falling asleep to the tangy smell of pickled onions and peace, and as you might have guessed by now, this wasn't a one-size-fits-all sleep chamber. Rooms varied depending on class, geography, and peculiar personal rituals. For example, in parts of rural Scotland, it was customary to place an iron object beneath the bed to ward off spirits and ensure a clean sleep. Often this was a horseshoe, but one woman reportedly used a small iron cauldron, claiming it kept her dreams warm and orderly, whatever that means. Meanwhile, in wealthier homes, the bedroom became a curated space, a kind of pre-sleep theatre. You'd have an armchair for reading, a fireplace for quiet reflection, and perhaps even a fainting couch for when your dreams got too dramatic before they even started. Furniture mattered. The placement of the bed was strategic, never under a window, drafts, never against the shared wall with a servant's room, thin walls, and certainly never facing a mirror, again ghosts. And that's not superstition, that's just good sense. Clothing played a role too. You didn't just tumble into bed in your trousers, no, you donned a nightshirt, often monogrammed, flowing, and absurdly long, like a haunted tablecloth with sleeves. For ladies it was cotton or muslin gowns, with lace collars and optional ruffles, depending on how dramatically one planned to toss and turn. Socks were optional, nightcaps were not. Now let's take a brief moment to appreciate the Victorian nightcap, not the alcoholic kind, though that too existed, but the soft, usually knitted hat worn to bed. Its purpose? To trap body heat, to tame unruly curls, and probably to look like a sleepy gnome. There's an entire genre of Victorian children's illustrations showing kids snuggled in bed with their hats flopped sideways, looking like weary mushrooms. All this preparation, this orchestrated ambience, wasn't just about comfort, it was about control. The night was vast, unknowable, full of creaks and shadows. But the room, that could be managed, lulled, arranged, and in that tidy cocoon a person might finally drift off, wrapped in lace, lavender, vinegar-scented linen, and the illusion that sleep was something they could design. You lie still now, don't you? Breathing a little slower, imagining your own sleep chamber, past or present. Maybe it's not as curated. Maybe there's no iron cauldron under your bed. But maybe there's still something sacred in the silence, something familiar in the scent of clean sheets and distant city hum. Stay with that. We're almost through this candlelit world of theories and thimbles. Just a few more steps before the night folds in completely. By now, you've sniffed Victorian lavender sachets, avoided haunted mirrors, and carefully tiptoed around the notion of sleep as architecture. But tonight, our journey deepens into one of the strangest corners of this world, the inventions. Yes, the gadgets, gizmos, and sometimes flat-out nonsense that hopeful Victorians conjured up in their endless quest for a better night's rest. Because if you thought modern sleep tech was weird, weighted blankets, anti-snore mouthguards, and apps that whisper whale sounds into your ear, you really haven't seen anything yet. Let's begin with a favorite of eccentric inventors, the mechanical bed shaker. This wasn't for waking you up. No, this device gently jostled you to help you fall asleep. One 1870s patent described a bed suspended on springs and connected to a system of weights and pulleys. As the user lay still, the bed would gently rock side to side, like a cradle for grown-ups with insomnia and loose change. Historians still argue whether anyone actually used this more than once before vomiting. But why stop with rocking when you can rotate? Some more experimental devices involved rotating mattresses. You'd lie down and be spun, slowly, very slowly, in a circle, meant to distract the brain from anxious thoughts. In practice, you probably just got tangled in your nightshirt and slid halfway to the floor. Then there was the pneumatic sleep helmet, a strange hood-like device designed to deliver pure air to the sleeper's face while blocking out external sounds. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and looked like a cross between a beekeeper's veil and a medieval torture hood. Yet it sold reasonably well, because when you're desperate to sleep, even a sleep-diving helmet starts to sound reasonable. A similar concept was the aerating pillow. This one had hidden slits that allowed a controlled breeze, pumped by bellows, mind you, to pass gently across your face throughout the night. Simulates a calm mountain wind, one ad boasted. What it actually simulated was the constant suspicion that someone was breathing near your ear. Let's move from airflow to weight. Today's weighted blankets promise calming pressure. The Victorians tried this too, but in a way only they could, by layering, heavily. Some sleep guides recommended 7 or more blankets, each made of progressively coarser material, wool, cotton, flannel, and a final layer of quilted velvet, creating what one writer called a noble burden. The idea was simple. If you couldn't calm your thoughts, you could at least pin them down physically. And then we come to the most delightfully misguided contraption of all, the anti-snore head brace. Imagine, if you will, a series of leather straps that crisscross your head and chin, with the goal of holding your mouth shut while you sleep. Think a horse's bridle, but for gentlemen with sinus issues. These were marketed as marital savers. Anecdotal evidence suggests they may have prevented sleep more often than they preserved love. Still awake? Good, because now we arrive at the sleep harmonium, a musical invention designed to lull the sleeper with gentle tones produced by pedals at the foot of the bed. You were meant to pump the pedals slowly with your feet, like a church organist, playing only lullabies. The logic was that the movement kept your body engaged, while the melody soothed your mind. You can imagine the kind of person who'd take this seriously, also owned a scented nightcap, and perhaps a diary labeled Nocturnal Thoughts. Let's not forget the Somno Dome, a lesser-known invention that involved a semicircular canopy fitted around the sleeper's upper torso and head. It was designed to trap warmth, block out light, and retrain the body's etheric field, whatever that means. Skeptics thought it was silly. Believers swore it aligned their dreams to better resemble Greek mythology. What's remarkable is that many of these inventions were patented, manufactured, and yes, even reviewed in newspapers. People tried them. People argued about them. One 1891 medical journal devoted 3 whole pages to evaluating the effectiveness of the velvet-weighted slumber sack, concluding it was pleasantly restrictive, though faintly claustrophobic. Now let's zoom in on a truly niche invention, the lettuce infusion machine. This one takes our old friend lettuce, the go-to salad for Victorian sleeplessness, and industrializes it. A small boiler would steep lettuce leaves in warm water and release the vapor into a bedside tube, which the user would inhale like a spa-going caterpillar. One critic wrote, "It smells of soup, but it dreams of clouds." You start to see the pattern here, a strange blend of science, superstition, and sincere desperation. Victorians were not passive about their sleep, they engineered it. They tinkered and trialed, wrote long letters to newspapers complaining about nocturnal difficulties, and held sleep salons where guests compared bedtime strategies like modern folks compare phone apps. There were even lectures. In 1883, a London physician gave a public talk titled "Sleep, Its Habits, Its Cultivation, and Its Failures." The audience was packed. People took notes. One woman reportedly fainted during the section on dream suppression. Whether from insight or boredom remains unclear. Of course, not every invention was mechanical. Some were philosophical. Some Victorians believed counting backwards from 500 by sevens could rewire the brain into docility. Others swore by repeating the word pillow until the word lost all meaning. Still others wrote down their worries, placed the note under the bed and whispered, "Not tonight, sir," to their own subconscious. So you lie there now, half amused, half drowsy. Your bed may not rotate. Your room may not smell like boiled lettuce and lavender vinegar, but perhaps in some odd way you understand these people better than you expected. Their inventions may seem strange, even laughable, but the need behind them, the yearning for a quiet mind, a still body, and a gentle drift into dreams, that's timeless. And who knows? Maybe tonight, as you drift off, you'll hear the distant wheeze of a sleep. By now the Victorian world around you is dim and smell the faintest hint of soft velvet drapes drawn across an ornate window. You've walked candlelit hallways, steeped lettuce in teacups, and examined head-bracing contraptions more suited to science fiction than bedtime comfort. And yet, for all their quirks, all their earnest absurdity, the Victorians still had one more gift to offer, the art of winding down. This final stretch of the night is less about cure and more about ritual. Because while inventions and potions tried to trick the body into submission, routines were there to coax it, to soothe it like an old friend telling you a gentle story in a quiet room. Victorians took this seriously. The wealthier classes would speak of retiring, not just going to bed. It was a process, a ceremony. You didn't collapse into bed. You glided toward it like the denouement of a long-winded novel. There were no phones to check, no last scroll through social media. Just the slow rhythm of habit, a warm basin wash, brushed hair counted in strokes of 50 or more, perhaps a brief prayer, a whispered verse of poetry, or the crackle of a small hearth fire winding down with you. Some read novels, carefully chosen ones, mind you. No thrills, no murders. One popular choice was Charles Dickens's The Pickwick Papers, meandering, low stakes, full of eccentric characters and weather reports. It was said to divert the mind without disturbing it, a perfect Victorian bedtime companion. Others preferred dream journals or night books, where they logged half-remembered fantasies from the night before in shaky ink. Historians still debate whether these journals helped with sleep or simply revealed how delightfully bizarre the Victorian imagination could be. One entry from 1887 simply reads, "Argued with a goat on a train, lost." And of course, there was the room itself. Bedrooms were arranged for serenity, thick carpets to muffle sound, lace curtains to soften morning light, and often portraits of relatives watching over you. comforting to some, unsettling to others, but always, always silence, silence. To the Victorian mind it was not the absence of sound, but a kind of presence, a texture, a favorable condition, one doctor called it, under which the mind can finally unlatch its door. The working class might not have had peace and quiet in abundance, but even they knew the value of pausing, of letting the day's noise fall away, one sound at a time. So here you are now, in that moment. The noise of the modern world has ebbed. The lettuce law, the nightcaps, the dreams of rotating beds, all softly folded and packed away. All that's left is stillness, that old familiar stillness that has ended every long day since the dawn of time. It's strange, isn't it, that across centuries and continents, humans have always searched for this same thing, a moment of calm, a little grace before the body floats off into dreams. And so we ease into the wind down, soft, slow, and unhurried. Take a long, quiet breath. Let your shoulders melt just a bit deeper into wherever you're resting. The world outside can wait. Its sharp corners and bright noises are nowhere near you now. You're wrapped in this moment, in this soft, strange little bubble of history and hush. You've wandered through lamplit rooms, listened to people whisper about silence like it was an elixir, and even learned how lettuce became a lullaby. There's nothing else you need to do. No decisions to make, no thoughts to chase. You're allowed to drift just as you are. The bed beneath you holds you like an old friend, familiar and steady. The air around you is still, maybe cool, maybe warm. Either way, it cradles you. Imagine the softest weight of a quilt across your body, a quiet hush settling gently on your skin. Your breath rises, falls, rises again. Let the images blur now. Let the strange machines and the sleep sermons and the flickering candlelight all become soft smudges at the edge of your mind. There's no need to remember it all. You're not here to know. You're here to rest. Sleep is near. You don't have to chase it. Just wait. Let your mind grow drowsy and loose. Let your muscles follow. Let the room around you fade until all that's left is the rhythm of your breath and the whisper of quiet. You've earned this. Good night.